Welcome to Tech Bites with Ash, where we discuss trends in digital technology that support true business outcomes. I'm Ashu Bhatia, a consultant, an author, and a practitioner of all practical insights for making informed decisions on your technology investments. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Tech Bites with Ash. I really appreciate all the feedback and the DMs I got in the last couple of videos. I wanted to use this to kind of make this content more applicable to you guys. So this place is more about really trying to understand almost all digital trends that we can leverage to make our business outcomes that we're trying to do in our projects. Today I thought cloud was a very important topic, which is a building block these days on a lot of technology transformation initiatives. Wanted to cover pretty much the how, the what, and the why of all things cloud so that we at least have a good perspective on how that technology entails stitching it all together. As always, I like to start with my anchor slide. It's all about customer experience. It's all about employee experience. It depends on what your digital strategy, what your journey is like, and you kind of take different initiatives on different axes and try to bring your whole enterprise to be more digital. With that, I wanted to give a little bit of initial knowledge on what really is cloud computing, and I will get into a little bit of basics so that some of my audience is very business heavy and needs to understand what is this technology stack and why the hype about cloud, right? So the first thing is, if you look at technology in general, I call it the cheesecake model. The first thing is there's a lot of infrastructure, which is all plumbing, as they call it, right? So there's servers to compute, there's storage to store, there's networks to connect and get the data moving. Eventually, on top of all that, you have applications which you actually interact with those computers and you are able to provide an interface to understand what crunching needs to be done. On top of that, there's a whole data and integration layer that you really use to kind of connect with different parts of those applications inside or outside the organization to really make sense of what you're trying to do. And finally, on top of that is all business processes like platform systems that sit to kind of make that whole technology stack, as we call it, work, right? So when computers came to the fore, things have evolved from very heavy mainframe computers to eventually client-server computers where you could do a lot of stuff on your laptop and it would be talking to a server and storing your things and your logic and your data. And then eventually, computing has been going on and you do more on your mobile apps, as well as these days trying to do it elsewhere outside the company. But the key here is that you always invested in certain hardware, right? So people used to spend a lot of money, a lot of resources with companies like HP, Dell, Microsoft, just understanding, and IBM, understanding how to get storage computing, how to get server computing, all of that within their company, and invest in that to build some systems, right? So this was called on-premises or on-prem, as some of our technology guys call it. As things evolved and people realized that, hey, a lot of companies already have some of this compute, storage, etc. out there, is there a way to connect with them and kind of use that compute for things that I need for my own organization, right? So of course, we know Amazon kind of did that quite a bit and a lot of companies were kind of looking at that technology. When that began to happen, you see the bottom layer, people first looked at infrastructure, right? So they looked at infrastructure as in servers, storage, etc., where you could use someone else's investments, use it on a usage basis, and then pay them for that, and then just kind of do your work within your own company. That became the initial stages of what we call IaaS, infrastructure as a service, right? Then people said, hey, what about my developers? What about my people who are building those applications? Can I get something that people have already invested elsewhere for them to use so that you don't have to do maintenance, you don't have to worry about licenses, end of life, all of that management that you need for your IT organization. A lot began to happen, came PaaS, so platform as a service began to happen. Eventually, a lot of people said they want to kind of start using the whole stack that people have invested outside in. So things like, we all use Microsoft Word, Microsoft Teams, Salesforce.com, things like that where everything, the whole stack was being hosted by someone else and you just used it on a basis. So that became SaaS, right? And I know there's been a recent statement by Microsoft CEO that SaaS is again phasing out and there's other things because of agentic AI happening. But the key here was that as this technology evolved and people understood the power of having secure transactions, of having things work elsewhere, and then in the midst also change the way they allocated their budgets, right? So you didn't have to spend all these millions for server compute or storage compute within your organization. You could just, use what is out there and then basically pay for all that. This is what the term utility computing came to being, because it was kind of like electricity. The moment you switch on a bulb, you start using the electricity, you pay for that bulb, and then the moment you switch it off, you don't pay anymore, right? The generation of power and the management of power is all done elsewhere, but you're using and paying for what you're consuming. And that's the whole mindset of cloud computing that came to the fore. The other thing to understand out of this whole terminology is just the deployments, right? So cloud computing has public, private, as well as hybrid computing. What that means is some people are using public service providers, kind of like Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, or in Asia, a lot of people I've seen are using Alibaba, Ali Cloud, as well as Huawei, which is building their own data centers and doing things. So there's a lot of public cloud elements that you could use, and they're called hyperscalers, etc. So you can kind of leverage what those people are providing. In terms of the services, every one of these vendors is changing and enhancing their services to make things better, to provide all things compute, right? As we speak, as you watch this video, they're coming up with new services so that people can leverage some of the investments on their side and pay them on the consumption side of it. So that's public cloud. A private cloud is when you actually have all of these resources, but you're only for your own company, right? Whether it's through your own data center or through a private, arrangement that you pay from some of these public clouds who have a private data center, etc. And that's only for your specific needs. But typically, companies use a combination of all of this to really eventually use what is called hybrid, cloud computing. The interesting part here is that there's just different value drivers like anything else, right? So as I explained to you, the key was initially you could use what you want. So the way you start doing things, let's say you come up with a project and you want to kind of do some marketing on a website in a new country, right? In a new market. Instead of you deploying new servers and doing CapEx investments, you could actually try to leverage some cloud power and just kind of do your operational expenses, pay for that experiment, see if that thing is working, and then look and recalibrate your journey in terms of what you would need once you've kind of proven some of those initial outcomes. So that was what is called the elasticity of demand, that you could kind of gauge and convert some of your cost models from CapEx to OpEx, as well as you didn't have to do a lot of the things that I mentioned: server maintenance, putting new licenses, putting new patches, or having people to kind of maintain that. So you're saving some of that pieces, right? Very quickly, and I'll talk a little bit about the economic value of cloud. Very quickly, this does become very complicated, because as I say that, yes, cloud is invisible, but the bills are not, right? So how you manage that OpEx is something that a lot of folks are very interested in, and we'll cover some of that. The key here, though, is that from a technology architecture perspective, right, the key to understand is that as technology evolved, right, it went from monolithic to client server to VMs to almost like serverless. So your speed is changing, your costs are changing, but also what is changing is the complexity, right? Now your software is in very small granular pieces, and there's a lot of pieces to be integrated, talking to each other, perform so that the customers can use it, and then leverage cloud computing or edge computing to be able to do the same very seamlessly, because the customer doesn't care, frankly, right? The customer wants to use something, pay for something, and be done. What you do behind the scenes for your plumbing and your applications is not the concern of the consumer. So what happens in that is, and we'll cover maybe another topic one day, is this whole thing of APIs, that as you make your software very small and granular, you then expose what you need to do to kind of come and stitch the solution together. There's a lot more complexity that you have to manage from an architectural perspective that makes cloud computing somewhat complicated, but very, very useful, because for certain things, it's definitely a way to go, although absolutely it's not the panacea for everything. So the key here is, as you really think of cloud, and most of the companies that I've worked with, small, large, typically will use some flavor of cloud. The entry points are different, the maturity is different. But as you navigate this journey to cloud, there's different things that you want to think through, right? So you want to think through which applications make sense for converting that whole CapEx-OpEx model, performance, etc. How will I move these applications, right? So there's this whole methodology that technology professionals use for calibrating and saying which kind of applications do we retire? Are they things that we just lift and shift? So there's a lot of technical jargon that is used to really understand how and which applications need to move. And then you have to gauge the cost involved and how hard will it be? Is it too customized? Is it an ERP system? Is it some supply chain software that cannot really go because there's too many customized rules? So you have to look at all those dimensions to understand how the journey will be. And then the other piece is, once you've decided how you phase out those applications and keep on-prem and your cloud deployments together, where will they go? Should you host them on a public cloud? If so, which ones? Do you put all your bets in one cloud service provider, or do you hedge your bets through containerization? So there's a lot of those decisions to be made. And then eventually, in what order? The sequencing is going to be important because that changes depending on your risk appetite, depending on how you are taking some of your assets and really deploying them for eventually the consumers using them. As an example, if you just take out your phone right now and look at all your apps, if you're on the Western side, if you in the US, you use Amazon to do a lot of your retail shopping, or if you're in Asia, you use Shopee. Every day, these applications are being, updated without you even knowing them, right? So most of the settings on your iPhone or your Android phone, these applications are being updated because they know that certain things that they're changing in terms of software deployments are seamless to the consumer. And that is all happening through certain things that the IT organization does with things that are on-prem as well as on cloud. And the speed by which these things are coming to fruition is almost mind-boggling, and the consumers are almost expecting that in terms of them not knowing the friction, as it's called, being very minimal, and they're just mostly engaged in usage of your applications, right? So I won't cover the value proposition, but as you saw, elasticity of demand, you use it only when you need it. Flexible computing, which means you're kind of using it only when needed. Speed to market, it does make your things a little faster. Cost flexibility, I didn't call it cost reduction or cost containment, it's cost flexibility. A lot of people, in my experience, I work with a lot of CIOs, but a lot of CFOs are my clients too these days, especially when it comes to cloud, because they're all focused on saying, if I'm spending all this money, I don't want my bills, my OpEx to be suddenly out of order, right? So there's a lot of that stuff. And this is one slide that typically captures how the journey entails from a value and cost perspective. Depending on which applications you go for, what you're trying to do, your initial costs will tend to go up because you're absolutely keeping your current costs and maintaining your systems as you go. Of course, there's a lot of dimensions around what growth you're perceiving, how quickly you're able to deploy, but there's typically a little hump in your costs initially. But then, if you're able to put the discipline around how you bring these deployments together, you bring some cost down, so the total cost of ownership begins to go down after a certain period, and that's the value statement that you can build. A lot of my work has gone in and I have examples of behind examples. I used to work for a property casualty insurance company. I did this work for a retail bank. I did this work also for a hospitality company where people have to really manage this, otherwise very quickly your costs can go haywire, and everyone who has the initial momentum begins to lose traction on why cloud, right? So there's a lot of that stuff that you will read in the business and technology media as well. So this part I feel has to be really managed very well, and that's why I always say that to manage a program which is all about cloud, you've got to have different dimensions, right? The business case is absolutely the first element. The second is application assessment, knowing which places to go. Security is very big, and a lot of people talk about it in terms of how you can make sure that the data, the access, and all that is kind of really foolproof. Infrastructure migration, as they say, cloud migration. I had a client who once told me, cloud migration is like moving to a new house. It's very exciting, but on the way you're bound to lose a couple of socks, right? So you've got to be very careful in terms of how the migration is planned. And then the last piece is this cloud operating model. I've seen a lot of my clients use this kind of transformation program to really improve the whole IT organization within. Forget the business transformation and the enterprise transformation. They use this in terms of making sure they're getting more agile. They're using things like DevOps, which is development operations, and I'll cover that in one of my episodes for sure. They're using all of this to say that cloud computing is not only about where the computing happens, it's also more importantly about how the computing happens, and they use this as a leverage to kind of make some of those things better, right? So if I would give you the last piece on my end to kind of bring the thing to fruition on cloud is, let's say you're looking at a retail bank, right? So there's different functions in a retail bank, almost from understanding how someone comes in, what kind of products they buy, how do you kind of service them, etc. Different dimensions of your business functions all can be broken and understood, that which pieces can be more for outside functions. So as they call it, at least in retail banking, the core tends to remain very solid around things that are more mainframe because people trust it. It can't be broken. It's been invested years over years. But at least for what is called over the glass, where there's more customer interactions or customer engagement systems that can be definitely taken to cloud to kind of start doing things, you break out your whole architecture to see what makes most sense. And then you do the whole IAS, PS, and SAS on top, build the business case, and you start with certain areas and then go on. So the reason I wanted to take your time on cloud computing was, as we go on, and I have a session coming up with an industry veteran that talks a lot about what were their learnings, what are they doing with especially combining data on-prem and on cloud and bringing it all together. I wanted to kind of at least fill this in and kind of provide basics in terms of cloud computing. So I hope you found this very useful.